Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're doing something a little different. We are rolling up our sleeves and really digging into what I like to call the invisible architecture of the financial world. We're looking at the absolute foundation of the financial services industry in Canada. We have got a massive stack of documents here, specifically Units 1, 2, and 3 of the Canadian Investment Funds course, and our job is to extract the gold.
It is good to be back.
Yeah.
And you are so right to call it the architecture. I think a lot of people, when they see topics like regulation or compliance or registrant responsibilities, their eyes just glaze over.
Right. They think, oh, boring.
Exactly. They think it's just dry checklists, red tape, and, bureaucracy that's just designed to make their lives difficult. But when you actually read this material, and really read it, you realize it's much, much more dramatic than that.
It really is. I was surprised. It reads less like a textbook and honestly more like a survival manual.
That's the perfect way to put it. We are essentially talking about the difference between order and chaos in the markets. We are looking at the regulatory environment, the responsibilities of the registrant, that's the advisor, and the core obligations that keep clients safe.
And if they didn't exist.
If these rules didn't exist, the financial system would be the Wild West. No question.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive. I don't want us to just sit here and list rules for an exam. I want to frame this for you, the listener, as the gatekeeper role. Whether you're an aspiring advisor studying for your license or an investor just trying to understand how the system works, this is the manual on how to protect the client and, I guess, the integrity of the market itself.
That gatekeeper concept is the thread. It's the one idea that ties all of this material together. It really shifts the perspective from, I have to follow these rules because the boss said so, to something much more profound. It's, I am the first line of defense. I am the wall between legitimate commerce and, fraud, between a secure retirement and financial ruin, between clean money and organized crime.
Wow. It sounds pretty intense when you put it that way.
It is intense. It has to be. The stakes are incredibly high. We are dealing with people's life savings, their futures, and honestly, the stability of the entire economy.
Okay, so we've got a pretty big journey mapped out for us here. We're going to try and navigate, what do you call it? The alphabet soup of regulators.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Because let's be honest, Canada has, just a ton of acronyms, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
CSA, MFDA, IIRC, OSFI. It can make your head spin.
Yeah, we'll get into all that. And then we're going to tackle some of the really strict rules, the ones around money laundering and privacy.
Which are huge. That's the gatekeeper rule right there.
Exactly. Then we'll walk what I'm calling the ethical tightropes, conflicts of interest.
Always a tricky area.
And then we're going to land on what the source material basically calls the holy trinity of advising.
Ah, yes, the big three.
KYC, KYP, and suitability.
You really can't overstate it. Those three, they're the absolute heartbeat of the job. You simply can't function as an advisor without mastering them.
So let's unpack this. Let's start with the landscape. Who is actually in charge here? Because when I look at the sources, it seems like Canada has a very unique setup compared to, say, the United States or the UK.
It is unique.
It feels a bit fragmented.
It is, and it stems directly from our Constitution. In many countries, you have one big federal regulator, like the SEC in the U.S., that oversees everything from a central office in Washington.
One ring to rule them all.
Exactly. But in Canada, securities regulation is a provincial jurisdiction. That's the key difference.
So the power sits with the provinces.
Yeah.
The federal government in Ottawa doesn't really have a say.
Broadly speaking, for securities specifically, that is correct. If you're operating in Ontario, you answer to the Ontario Securities Commission, the OSC. If you're in Alberta, it's the Alberta Securities Commission.
So there's one for every province.
And territory. There are 13 separate securities regulators in Canada, 10 provinces, 3 territories, and each one of them administers its own Securities Act.
13. That sounds incredibly inefficient. Does that mean if I want to work with a client in Vancouver and another client in Halifax, I have to memorize 13 different rule books?
Well,
that seems like a nightmare for anyone trying to do business nationally.
Historically, it was a bit of a nightmare. It was very fragmented. Just imagine being a national bank and having to file 13 different sets of paperwork, get 13 different approvals every time you launched a new mutual fund.
Nothing would ever get done.
It was slow and expensive, but the system realized that capital needs to flow freely across the country. You can't have a financial wall at the Manitoba border. So enter the CSA, the Canadian Securities Administrators.
Okay, so is this a super regulator then? Does it sit above the provinces, like a Supreme Court for stocks?
No, and that is a very common misconception. The CSA isn't a federal boss. It has no legal authority on its own to override a province.
So what is it?
Think of it more as a forum. It's a round table where all 13 of these provincial regulators come together to coordinate and, talk.
Like a United Nations for Canadian finance?
That's a great analogy. That's exactly what it is. Their main goal is to harmonize the rules.
Harmonize?
Yeah, to make the regulations in British Columbia look pretty much the same as the regulations in Nova Scotia. They want to create one harmonized rule book that everyone agrees to adopt.
Okay, so they're the peacekeepers ensuring consistency. Because if the rules were totally different from province to province, nobody would invest across borders. It'd be too complex.
Precisely. They want to streamline the capital markets so they work efficiently. And to make that practical, they developed something called the passport system.
I love this concept. It sounds exactly like what it implies. Can you walk us through how that actually works for an advisor on the ground?
It really is a brilliant solution to the jurisdictional problem. The passport system basically says that a registrant, that's you, the advisor, or your firm, generally only has to deal with your principal regulator.
And the principal regulator is?
It's usually the regulator in the province where your head office or your main working office is located.
So if my office is in Toronto, the OSC is my principal regulator.
Right. And if you meet all the requirements there, you pass your exams, you have the required capital, you have your compliance structure in place, the other provinces will respect that decision.
They'll just take the OSC's word for it.
In a sense, yes, you get your passport stamped, so to speak.
So I don't have to fill out 12 other full applications.
Essentially, yes. You make one filing with your principal regulator, you pay the fees to the other jurisdictions you want to operate in, and you're good to go. You do not have to go through the entire vetting process 13 separate times.
That makes so much sense. Is there a catch?
There's a small nuance. The source material points out that Ontario hasn't formally adopted the passport rule in the same legislative way as the others.
Of course.
But in practice, they have an interface system that functions very similarly. So for all intents and purposes, it works. It allows national firms to operate without drowning in red tape.
That is a lifesaver for the industry, I'd imagine. Yeah. Now, below these government regulators, the provincial commissions, we have these other bodies called SROs, self-regulatory organizations. This is where the source material gets specific about a group called the MFDA.
Right. And the key word there, as you said, is self-regulatory. The government regulators, the commissions, they delegate the power to the industry to police itself.
So the industry polices itself.
It does, but under the very strict supervision of the commissions.
Why do they do that? Is it just to save money on government staff? Or is there a deeper logic to it?
There's a real logic to it. The idea is that the industry experts, the people in the trenches, they know the technical details best. I mean, who knows better how a mutual fund trade actually settles? A career bureaucrat in a government office, or the people who are actually running the mutual fund dealers every single day?
That people are doing the job.
Exactly. The SROs are closer to the ground, they can react faster to new issues, and they understand the nuances of the different business models.
So who are the main players here that our listener really needs to know about?
For the purpose of this source material, we're really looking at two main bodies. First, and most relevant to this course, is the MFDA, the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada.
The MFDA.
Right. If you are licensed to sell mutual funds in Canada, outside of Quebec, they are your direct overseer. They're the ones who set the specific rules for your conduct, your business structure, and they're the ones who conduct the audits.
So if I'm a mutual fund rep, the MFDA is like my direct regulatory manager. They're the ones looking over my shoulder.
In a regulatory sense, yes. They are the ones who will come into your branch, knock on the door, and ask to see your files.
Got it. And the other one is IROC.
Yes, IIROC, the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada. IROC is the SRO that regulates the investment dealers.
And what do they do?
Those are the firms that sell individual stocks, bonds, options, derivatives, the ones that deal with margin accounts, more complex securities. It's a different, broader scope of license.
Okay, so let me see if I have this straight. If I walk into a typical bank branch to buy a mutual fund for my RRSP, I am likely dealing with an advisor regulated by the MFDA.
Almost certainly, yeah.
But if I go to a big brokerage firm to day trade stocks or buy options, that's IROC territory.
Precisely. Different licenses, different products, and therefore different oversight bodies. No, the ethical principles are very similar, but the technical rules are different.
And the source material really emphasizes that you need to stay in your lane.
Absolutely. If you are licensed by the MFDA, you cannot go around giving advice on or selling individual stocks. That's outside your registration, and it's a serious breach.
Now, there's always an exception in Canada, and the source material highlights Quebec. As usual, Quebec likes to do things a little differently.
Quebec has a distinct structure. A lot of it has to do with its civil code legal system, which is different from the common law system used in the rest of Canada.
So they don't use the MFDA.
No. In Quebec, you have the AMF, the Autorité des marchés financiers. The AMF is the government regulator, effectively the super commission for all financial services in Quebec.
Okay, but they also have another body mentioned, the CSF. What's that?
Right. The Chambre de sécurité financière. The CSF is the body specifically responsible for the ethics, discipline, and continuing education of representatives. So if you're in Quebec, you aren't dealing with the MFDA. You're dealing with the AMF and the CSF. It's just a different map you have to follow.
Got it. So we have the rule makers, we have the police, but what happens when things go wrong? When a client feels they've been wronged, the sources mention a sort of complaint department, the OBSI.
The Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. This is just a crucial piece of the consumer protection puzzle.
What do they do?
The OBSI is an independent, impartial body that resolves disputes between banking or investment firms and their clients. It's an alternative to the court system.
So if I think my advisor ripped me off and I complain to the bank and they ignore me, I go to the OBSI.
Correct. There's a process, though. First, you have to complain directly to the firm. They have 90 days to provide you with the final answer. If they don't resolve it to your satisfaction or those 90 days pass with no answer, then you can escalate it to the OBSI.
And what can they do? Can they fine the advisor or put them in jail?
No, they're not a regulator in that sense. They don't have enforcement powers. They are a dispute resolution service. They investigate, they look at the evidence from both sides, and they can recommend a financial settlement up to $350,000.
Recommend. Is that binding? Can the bank just say, no thanks, we disagree with your recommendation?
That is the controversial part. Technically, the OBSI's recommendations are not legally binding in the same way a court order is.
So the bank can just ignore it?
They can, but it's not that simple. For the firms, membership in OBSI is mandatory, and if the OBSI recommends a settlement and the firm refuses to pay, the OBSI has a powerful tool. They publish the name of the firm.
Ah, the name and shame.
Exactly. And for a major financial institution, the reputational damage of being publicly named for refusing to compensate a client is massive. It's terrible PR. So in practice, firms almost always comply.
And it gives the little guy a chance.
It does. It provides an alternative to the court system, which is expensive and slow for the average person. I mean, think about it. If you lost $10,000 due to an error, you can't afford a $20,000 lawyer to sue the bank. The OBSI is free for the consumer.
That's a huge distinction. Okay, before we move off the regulators, I just want to clarify one more acronym because I see it in the news a lot, especially regarding the big banks. OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Do they regulate mutual funds?
No, and that is a very, very common point of confusion. OSFI regulates federal banks, insurance companies, and trust companies, but their focus is prudential.
Prudential. What does that mean in this context? Safety and soundness.
Exactly. They are looking at the solvency of the institution. They're making sure the bank has enough cash in the vault to cover withdrawals. They're stress testing their loan portfolios. They're checking the foundations of the building, so to speak, to make sure it doesn't collapse.
So they're worried about the bank itself going bankrupt.
Right. They do not regulate the sale of mutual funds that happens inside the building or the conduct of the advisor selling them. That responsibility falls to the provincial securities commissions and the SROs like the MFDA.
So OSFI worries about the bank going broke. The MFDA worries about the client getting bad advice.
That is the perfect way to distinguish them.
Okay, so we know who the players are. Now let's look at the rulebook itself. The sources distinguish between securities acts and national instruments. What's the difference there?
It's a good distinction to make. Think of the Securities Act as the broad foundational law passed by the provincial legislature. It's the what?
The big picture.
The big picture. It says, Thou shalt be registered to sell securities. It lays down the law of the land. But laws are often broad and they're very slow to change. You have to pass a bill through Parliament.
So the national instruments are the nitty-gritty details.
Yes. The national instruments, or NIs as you'll hear them called, are the specific harmonized rules created by the CSA. They are the how. They get into the details of exactly what form you need to fill out or exactly what font size your disclosure document needs to be in. They can be updated more quickly than the acts.
And the source material highlights 4 big instruments we really need to know. These seem to be the pillars of the mutual fund world.
They are. I mean, if you are in this industry, these are your Bibles. You live and breathe these.
So what's the first one?
First is NI 31103. This is a big one. It covers registration requirements. It tells you what you need to do to get your license, what proficiency you need, like passing the exam this course is for, and what you need to do to keep it. It covers exemptions, capital requirements, insurance. It's the rule book for the person and the firm.
Okay, so that's about the advisor. Then we have the 81 series, which seems to be about the product, the mutual fund itself.
Correct. The 2 big ones are NI 81101 and NI 81102. They work together.
So what does 81101 do?
81101 is all about disclosure. This is the rule that mandates the fund facts document. You know that 2-page plain language summary you're supposed to get before you buy any mutual fund?
The one with the charts and the risk rating.
That's the one. NI 81101 mandates it. It ensures the client isn't buying a mystery box. It dictates that you must provide clear, easy-to-understand information about what the fund is, what it costs, and what the risks are.
And 81102.
That is about the fund's operations. It dictates what the fund manager is actually allowed to do with your money. For example, it sets limits on how much of the fund can be invested in illiquid assets or how much the fund is allowed to borrow.
So it keeps them honest.
It prevents a fund that calls itself conservative from secretly taking wild, reckless bets with derivatives. It sets the guardrails for the investment strategy itself.
Okay, and the last one? NI 81105.
This one is sales practices. This is a spicy one. This regulates how products are sold and incentivized.
How so?
It covers things like trailing commissions, and it prohibits certain sales contests and quotas that might push an advisor to sell a specific fund just to win a trip to Hawaii or a new TV.
So this is the no free lunch rule.
Basically, it's designed to ensure the advice you get isn't being corrupted by kickbacks or incentives that have nothing to do with your well-being. It says you can't bribe advisors to sell your fund over a competitor's. The focus must be on the client.
This transitions us perfectly into those gatekeeper responsibilities we talked about at the top. We said that advisors are the front line of defense. The sources spend a lot of time on money laundering.
This is huge, and it's not optional. The legislation is the PCML-TFA, the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act.
That is a mouthful.
It is, but the concept is simple enough. Money laundering is the process of taking dirty money cash from drug trafficking, fraud, organized crime, and running it through the legitimate financial system to make it look clean.
Right, like the shows Ozark or Breaking Bad.
Exactly like that. And the sources break this down into 3 distinct stages. I think this is fascinating because, like you said earlier, it really does read like a crime novel.
So let's walk through them. Placement, layering, and integration. What's placement?
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario. Let's say we have a criminal organization selling illegal goods. They have a problem. Piles and piles of physical cash.
Right, a suitcase full of 20s.
Yes, that is their problem. You can't just walk into a Lamborghini dealership and buy a car with a duffel bag of cash without raising a lot of red flags. So, stage 1 is placement. This is the riskiest stage for the criminal.
Why is it the riskiest?
Because this is where the dirty cash physically enters the financial system. Imagine someone walking into a bank or a mutual fund dealer with that suitcase of cash and trying to buy a money order or deposit it into an account.
That is where the alarm should be going off.
Exactly. The system is designed to catch this. And that's why criminals often try to break the cash down into smaller amounts, a technique called smurfing, and have multiple people deposit it. But once the money is in the system, they move to stage 2. Layering.
This sounds like the shell game.
It is the shell game.
Wow.
This involves moving the money around electronically, wire transfers between different accounts, buying and selling securities quickly, moving it to different companies in different jurisdictions.
Just to confuse the trail.
The goal is to create a complex, dizzying paper trail that makes it almost impossible for an auditor or a police officer to trace the money back to the original crime. They want to disconnect the money from its dirty source.
And finally, stage 3, integration.
This is the payday. This is where the money re-enters the legitimate economy looking clean. The criminal sells the investment or withdraws the funds from the account, and now it looks like legitimate profit from a smart investment.
So they can use it to buy things.
Exactly. They can use it to buy a house, a yacht, or a luxury car. And if the CRA ever asks where they got the money, they show a statement from the investment firm. Look, I made a profit on this mutual fund. The money is now clean.
And the sources are careful to make a distinction between money laundering and terrorist financing. They sound similar, but are they not the same thing?
They are flip sides of the same coin, and the distinction is critical for a gatekeeper. Money laundering involves dirty money trying to become clean. Terrorist financing can actually involve clean money, legitimate donations, salary savings, business profits being channeled towards illegal, violent acts.
Well, that's a really scary distinction.
It is. It means the source of funds might look totally fine. A person with a regular job could be sending the money. But the destination or the intended use is the problem. It requires a different kind of vigilance, looking at where the money is going, not just where it came from.
So who is watching all this? Who is the central brain? We have FinTray.
Right. The Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, they are the national intelligence unit for this stuff.
So what's my job as an advisor? Am I supposed to arrest people?
No, absolutely not. Your job isn't to be the police. Your job is to be an intelligence gatherer. You are the eyes and ears on the ground, and your duty is to report specific intelligence to FinTrade.
What exactly do we have to report? Because I assume we don't report every single transaction.
No, that would drown them in useless data. There are very specific mandatory reporting triggers. First, large cash transactions.
What's the limit?
If a client brings in $10,000 or more in physical cash in a single 24-hour period, that must be recorded to FinTrack. There's no judgment call. It is an automatic, mandatory report.
Even if they seem like a perfectly nice person, even if it's a grandma who says she keeps cash under the mattress.
No exceptions. It doesn't mean she's a criminal. It's just a data point for FinTrack. If it's $10,000 or more in cash, you file the report, period.
Okay, what else?
Second, terrorist property. If you know or even suspect that some property or funds are owned or controlled by a terrorist group, you report it immediately. But the trickiest one, and the most important one for an advisor's intuition, is the suspicious transaction report.
What makes a transaction suspicious? That feels really subjective.
It is subjective, and that's where your professional judgment comes in. The rulebook defines it as any completed or attempted transaction for which there are reasonable grounds to suspect it's related to a money laundering or terrorist financing offense.
Can you give me an example? That's still a bit vague.
Sure. Let's say you have a client who is a student. Their Know Your Client form says they have an income of $15,000 a year from a part-time job. Suddenly, they want to deposit $50,000 in cash into a mutual fund and then immediately wire it to an offshore account in a known tax haven the next day.
That does not add up at all. The money's source is a mystery, and the transaction has no logical investment purpose.
Right. That's a huge red flag. Or a client who seems obsessed with avoiding the reporting thresholds. They ask, what's the limit for reporting cash? You say $10,000, and they say, okay, great, I'd like to deposit $9,900 today. That is suspicious. You have to file a suspicious transaction report, or STR.
And the key here from the source is the word attempted, right? If I say to that student, I can't do that transaction, it looks shady, and they just grab their money and walk away, I still have to report it.
Absolutely. The attempt itself is the critical intelligence MTATRIC needs. It tells them that someone is probing the system for weaknesses. If you don't report it, that criminal just walks down the street to the next bank or investment firm and tries again.
The sources also talk about PHEPs, politically exposed persons. This sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It kind of does, but it's a very practical measure. It's simply a recognition that people in high-profile public office, we're talking heads of state, military generals, senior judges, ambassadors, are at a higher risk for things like corruption or bribery.
So we treat them differently. Are they automatically suspects?
No, not at all. It doesn't mean they're criminals. It just means they are in a position where someone, somewhere, might try to bribe them. So we apply a higher level of scrutiny. We have to take reasonable measures to determine where their wealth comes from.
So if a foreign minister of defense wants to open an account with you with $10 million, you need to ask.
You need to ask, does your government salary support this level of wealth? If not, it could be a bribe. You have to do that extra due diligence.
Okay, moving from crime to privacy. We have PEPIDA. What is that?
It's the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. This is the federal law that governs how you collect, use, and store your clients' personal data.
And what's the core principle?
The core principle is consent. You can only collect information for a specific purpose that you've disclosed. You must have the client's consent to do so, and you must store it securely.
So I can't just collect their health information if I'm only opening a savings account for them.
Exactly. Why do you need to know their blood type to sell them a GIC? You don't.
Yeah.
So you can't ask, and you definitely can't take their list of investments and sell it to a third-party marketing firm without their explicit informed permission.
And speaking of contacting clients, the sources bring up the DNCL, the Do Not Call list, and CASL, the anti-spam legislation. These are big for advisors.
They are huge for your daily prospecting. If a person's phone number is on the national do not call list, you cannot cold call them. Period. Full stop.
Unless. There's always an unless.
Unless you have an existing business relationship. If they are a current client or were a client in the last 18 months, you can call them. Or if they made an inquiry, say they filled out a form on your website asking for information in the last 6 months, you can call. But you can't just pick up the phone book and start dialing random numbers anymore.
And CASL covers emails.
Right. Canada's anti-spam legislation. You cannot send commercial electronic messages, emails, texts without express consent. And express consent means they actively opted in. You can't use a sneaky pre-checked box that says, sign me up. They have to check the box themselves.
And you have to let them out.
Yes. Every message must have a clear, working unsubscribe mechanism. And if they click unsubscribe, you have 10 business days to take them off your list.
One last regulatory piece that seems to come from outside our borders, but has a huge impact here. FATCA.
The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. This is U.S. legislation, but it has a massive impact in Canada. The reason is that the U.S. is one of the only countries in the world that taxes its citizens on their worldwide income, regardless of where they live.
So if you're an American citizen living and working in Toronto, the IRS still wants a cut of your Canadian salary.
They do. So to enforce this, the U.S. government essentially compels Canadian financial institutions to identify U.S. persons among your clients.
So when I open an account in Toronto, that's why I get asked if I am a U.S. person.
Yes, you'll see it on every account application form. And if you are, your account details are reported to the CRA, who then shares that information with the IRS under a treaty.
What happens if a Canadian firm says, no, we're not doing the IRS's dirty work for them?
Well, the penalty is severe. If a Canadian firm refuses to comply, they face a punitive 30% withholding tax on any U.S. source payments they receive. Since almost every Canadian bank deals heavily with the U.S. financial system, this would be catastrophic. It's essentially a financial sanction, so Canadian firms have no choice but to comply.
Okay, that covers the rules of the road. We know who makes the laws and what the major laws are. Now, I want to shift gears to the driver. Let's talk about ethics and conduct. The source material makes a really interesting distinction between unethical and illegal.
This is a nuanced but absolutely critical point. Illegal behavior like, stealing client money or forging a signature is almost always unethical. That's the obvious stuff.
Right.
But you can do things that technically follow the letter of the law, but that completely violate the spirit of the industry. That would be unethical.
Can you give me a clear example of that?
Sure. Let's say you recommend a mutual fund that is technically suitable. It fits the client's risk profile, fits their time horizon.
Yeah.
But you chose this specific fund purely because it pays you a higher commission than another better performing, cheaper alternative that is also perfectly suitable.
So the client isn't technically harmed in terms of risk, but they're paying more than they need to so I can get paid more.
Exactly. It might not be explicitly illegal in a strict criminal sense if all the fees were disclosed somewhere in the 100-page prospectus, but it is deeply unethical. It violates the industry's standard of conduct because you clearly put your interest ahead of the client's.
And the MFDA has a specific rule for this, doesn't it? Rule 2.1.1.
Mm-hmm. The golden rule of the MFDA. It states that you must deal fairly, honestly, and in good faith with your clients. You must observe high standards of ethics and conduct. And, this is my favorite part, you must refrain from unbecoming business conduct.
Unbecoming. It's such a great old-fashioned word. It sounds like something from a Victorian novel. But what does it actually mean in practice?
It's a catch-all. It basically means don't embarrass the profession. It means that even your behavior outside of work can be scrutinized if it reflects poorly on your integrity and trustworthiness.
So if I get arrested for, say, tax fraud in my personal life.
That is unbecoming business conduct. If you're running a side business that rips people off, that's unbecoming. The regulator can pull your license not because you broke a specific mutual fund rule, but because you proved you aren't a person of good character and therefore shouldn't be trusted with other people's money.
Now, within the firm, who ensures this ethical culture actually exists? We have the UDP and the CCO mentioned in the source material.
These are the two key compliance officers in any firm. The UDP is the ultimate designated person. This is usually the CEO or the president of the company.
And their job is?
They are responsible for the overall culture of compliance. They are the captain of the ship. The buck stops with them. They have to ensure the firm has the systems in place to follow the rules.
And the CCO.
The chief compliance officer. If the UDP is the captain, the CCO is the navigator or the chief engineer. They are the boots on the ground. They are the ones who create the specific policies. They monitor the trades. They review the files. They ensure the rules are actually being followed day to day.
So the UDP sets the vision. The CCO makes sure it actually happens.
A perfect summary.
The sources spend a lot of time discussing CRM and CFR. These seem to be the biggest shifts in the industry in the last, decade?
Oh, absolutely. CRM, the client relationship model, and the more recent CFR, the client-focused reforms, have fundamentally changed the advisor-client dynamic. It moved the industry from a buyer beware model to a client interest first model.
And one of the big outputs of this is the RDI, the Relationship Disclosure Information document.
Yes. When you open an account, you must receive this document. It is essentially the contract of expectations. It outlines in plain language exactly what the advisor is responsible for, what the costs are, what the risks are, and what conflicts of interest exist. It removes the ambiguity. No more "I didn't know."
And the reporting requirements have gotten much stricter. It used to be that you just get a statement once in a while saying, here's your balance.
Right. And maybe you'd see a percentage return that was calculated in a way that was hard to decipher. Now, thanks to CRM2, you get two very specific, very clear annual reports. One is the Report on Charges and Compensation.
I remember when this came out. It was a real shock for a lot of investors.
It was a wake-up call because it tells you in actual dollars and cents exactly what the dealer was paid, not 2% MER. It says, you paid our firm $1,250 this year for our services.
And seeing the actual dollar amount makes it so much more real.
It empowers the client to ask the right question. Am I getting $1,250 worth of value for this? And the second report is the performance report, which shows how your money actually grew or didn't using a standardized money-weighted return. It's all about total transparency.
Let's move to Section 4, Conflicts of Interest. This feels like the area where a well-meaning advisor is most likely to trip up if they aren't extremely careful. How do we define a conflict?
A conflict arises whenever the interests of the registrant, so the advisor or the firm, and the client diverge. Or sometimes when the advisor has an obligation to two different clients that are in conflict with each other.
And the sources are careful to note, this includes not just existing conflicts, but potential ones and even perceived conflicts.
That's a critical point, perceived conflicts. So even if you are being perfectly honest and impartial, if a reasonable person looking at the situation would think your judgment could be biased, you have a conflict.
So perception is reality here.
Yes, because this industry relies entirely on trust. If it looks fishy, it's a problem because it erodes that trust.
The sources outline 3 ways to handle conflicts, the 3 pillars.
Right. Avoid, control, and disclose.
Let's break those down, starting with avoid.
First, avoid. This is for the most serious conflicts. If a conflict inherently harms the client or is prohibited by law, you just can't do it. There's no way to manage it or disclose it to make it okay.
Like what?
The classic example is borrowing money from a client. You cannot manage that conflict. You have to avoid it entirely.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
Second, control. This is for conflicts that can exist within a firm but need to be managed with strict policies and procedures. For example, a large firm might have an investment banking arm that knows a company is about to be acquired and a retail advisory arm that sells that company's stock to the public.
That is a massive insider trading risk.
It's huge. So they use information barriers or firewalls. They physically and digitally separate the departments. The advisors on the retail side are blocked from knowing what the bankers on the other side know. They control the flow of sensitive information.
And the third one, disclose.
This is the most common one for daily interactions. If a conflict exists, you must tell the client about it clearly, in writing, and before the transaction happens. For example, I am recommending this in-house mutual fund, and you should know that my firm earns extra revenue because we own the company that manages it.
But disclosure isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, is it? Can I do something bad as long as I disclose it?
No. And this is a huge but. that's really been emphasized in the new client-focused reforms. Disclosure alone is not enough to cure a bad conflict. You can't just say, just so you know, I'm about to rip you off, but since I've disclosed it, it's okay.
Right.
You still have to be able to prove that the recommendation is in the client's best interest, regardless of the conflict. Disclosure is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Let's talk about some of the specific no-nos. The source material calls pre-signed forms the cardinal sin.
It is. This is a huge, huge no-no. It is probably the #1 reason advisors get fined or lose their license. Never, ever, under any circumstances, have a client sign a blank or incomplete form.
Even if the client says, look, I'm going on vacation to a remote island with no internet, just sign this form so you can make the trade later if the market crashes.
Especially then. If you do that, you have completely destroyed the audit trail. There is zero proof that the client actually authorized the specific details of that transaction. It essentially gives the advisor a blank check to do whatever they want. It is an immediate and severe regulatory breach.
Another prohibited practice mentioned is churning.
Right, or excessive trading. This is where an advisor buys and sells funds in a client's account, not because it benefits the client, but just to generate commissions for themselves.
How would you spot that?
If a client is in a portfolio of long-term mutual funds, they shouldn't be trading every week. Mutual funds are not day trading vehicles. If you see a high turnover rate that doesn't match the client's goals, that's a red flag for churning.
What about personal financial dealings? You mentioned borrowing.
The rule is extremely strict. No borrowing from clients, no lending to clients. It creates a bizarre and unacceptable power dynamic. I mean, if you owe your client a lot of money, are you really going to give them unbiased advice, especially if it involves risk? Probably not.
Are there any exceptions to that?
The only exception is for immediate family members who are also clients. But even then, it usually needs to be disclosed to and approved by the dealer. You can lend money to your mom, but you can't lend money to your best friend or your wealthy neighbor if they're your client.
And no private settlements. This one's interesting.
This is a big one. If a client complains and says, you lost me $1,000 because of an administrative error, you cannot just write them a personal check from your own bank account to make the problem go away.
But why not? The client gets their money back. Everyone's happy.
Because it hides the complaint from the dealer and from the regulator. It prevents the firm from spotting patterns of errors or misconduct. Maybe this advisor makes the same $1,000 error every month. The firm needs to know that. All complaints and settlements must go through the dealer's official channels.
One that might surprise people is POA's power of attorney.
Generally, a dealing representative cannot hold a power of attorney for a client's finances. You cannot have full legal control over their financial affairs. Again, the exception is for immediate family, a spouse, a parent, a child. But it must be disclosed and approved by the firm. You can't just become the POA for your elderly neighbor because you want to help them out. It's a massive, unmanageable conflict of interest.
And gifts. The source material mentions a fun example with a Florida condo.
Yeah, the example is an advisor letting a client stay in their Florida condo for free for a week. Or a client letting the advisor stay at their cottage. That is considered a substantial benefit. You cannot give or receive anything substantial.
Why not?
Because it creates a sense of obligation. It muddies the professional relationship. Gifts must be nominal. A calendar, a pen, taking them for a coffee, maybe a modest bottle of wine at Christmas. But a vacation or courtside Raptors tickets, absolutely not.
I want to touch on outside activities, or OBAs. In today's gig economy, a lot of people have side hustles.
And that's generally fine, but you must disclose them to your dealer, and they must be approved by the dealer. If you drive for Uber on the weekends, or prepare taxes on the side, or you sit on a charity board, your dealer needs to know about it.
Why does the dealer care if I drive for Uber on the weekend? It seems totally unrelated.
They care because of the risk of conflict, the risk to the firm's reputation, and the potential for client confusion. What if you start soliciting your Uber passengers to buy mutual funds from you?
I'll give you 5 stars if you buy this fund.
Exactly. Or what if you're the treasurer for a local charity and you start pushing the charity's money into your own firm's funds to generate commissions? Or worse, what if you embezzle the charity's money? The dealer is on the hook for your conduct, so they need to vet everything you do that involves money or a position of public trust.
Okay, we are arriving at the core of the episode. The Holy Trinity, as you called it, KYC, KYP, and suitability. The sources call this the heart of the daily job.
It really, really is. This isn't just paperwork you fill out once and forget. This is the entire diagnostic process of being an advisor. I like to use a doctor analogy.
Okay.
You can't prescribe medicine if you don't know the patient's symptoms and history. That's KYC. And you can't prescribe medicine if you don't know what the drugs do, their side effects, and how they interact. That's KYP. Suitability is simply the act of matching the right drug to the right patient for the right illness.
So step one,
Mhm.
KYC,
Right.
know your client. It's obviously not just getting their name and address.
No. It starts with establishing identity. We talked about that with money laundering. But then it goes much deeper into their personal circumstances, their age, their marital status, whether they have dependents, their employment situation.
Why does all that matter for an investment?
Because a 25-year-old single software engineer has a radically different financial life than a 45-year-old who is married with 3 kids and also supporting 2 aging parents. Their liquidity needs are different, their ability to take risks is different, their goals are different.
Then we have their financial circumstances. The sources distinguish between income and net worth.
A crucial distinction: income is the cash flow, what comes in every year. Net worth is the balance sheet, your total assets minus your total liabilities. You need to capture both, and you need to be precise about it. The sources emphasize calculating net worth accurately: liquid assets plus fixed assets minus all debts. You can't just guess or take a vague number.
And then we get to the trickier, more subjective stuff, investment knowledge.
Right. Novice versus sophisticated. This determines the language you can use and the complexity of the products you can recommend. If a client is a complete novice, selling them a complex derivative-based product is inherently unsuitable because they cannot possibly understand the risks they're taking. You have a duty to ensure they understand what they are buying.
Next up, time horizon.
When do they need the money? This is often where big mistakes happen. A client might say, oh, I want to invest for the long term. But then when you dig deeper, they reveal they want to use this money to buy a house in 2 years.
2 years is not long-term in the investment world.
Not at all. That is a short-term goal. You absolutely cannot put that money into volatile equities. If the market has a bad year, their down payment could be cut in half and they can't buy the house. You have to match the investment's volatility to the timeline of the goal.
And finally, the most debated and maybe the most important part of KYC, the risk profile. The sources break this down into 2 warring factions: risk tolerance and risk capacity.
This is the most critical concept for listeners to grasp. Risk tolerance is psychological. It's your sleep at night factor. Are you the type of person who panics and sells everything when the market drops 10%? That is your tolerance. It's purely emotional.
Okay, so that's how you feel. And risk capacity.
That is purely financial. It is a mathematical fact. Can you afford to lose money? If you are a retiree living on a fixed pension and this is all the money you have, your risk capacity is very low. You literally cannot afford a significant loss because you don't have the time or the income to earn it back.
So here's the classic scenario the sources highlight. You have a client who loves risk. They watch the markets. They want to bet it all on high-tech startups. They have a very high risk tolerance. But they're broke. They have no savings and a low, unstable income. So they have a very low risk capacity. What is their final risk profile?
The rule is crystal clear. The overall risk profile is determined by the lower of the 2. High tolerance plus low capacity equals a low risk profile. Full stop.
So the advisor has to say no to the client's demands.
Yes. You, as the professional gatekeeper, must tell the client, I understand you want to speculate, but your financial situation means you simply cannot afford to. Your professional duty overrides the client's wishes in this case.
That's a tough conversation to have. The client might get angry and walk away.
It is. But if you give in and you let them invest in high-risk products and they lose everything, you are the one who is liable. You failed your suitability obligation. You cannot override the risk capacity just because the client is feeling greedy. You have to be the adult in the room.
That moves us perfectly to step 2. KYP, know your product.
Right. You cannot recommend what you don't understand. And this isn't just knowing the name of the fund. You need to do your due diligence. You need to know the structure. Is it a mutual fund trust or a corporation? What are the underlying assets? Is it buying Canadian banks or emerging market debt? What are the specific risks involved?
And of course, the costs.
A huge emphasis on costs in the source material. You need to know all the costs: initial sales charges, ongoing management fees or MERS, trailer fees, deferred sales charges or DSCs. You have to be able to explain to the client exactly how these fees will impact their final return. If a fund returns 5% but costs 2.5% in fees, the client only gets to keep 2.5%. You have to understand and explain that performance drag.
And the product shelf, what's that about?
Right. As an advisor, you can only sell products that have been reviewed and approved by your dealer. This approved list is called the product shelf. You can't just go find some random, interesting investment online and sell it to your client. That's a practice called selling away, and it's strictly prohibited. The dealer has to vet the product first to ensure it's legitimate and not a scam.
Okay, which brings us to the final step. Step 3, suitability determination, the intersection of the first two.
This is where it all comes together. This is where KYC meets KYP. You take the client's complete profile, you look at the product's attributes, and you ask the critical question, is this a suitable match?
And under the new client-focused reforms, it goes even further than that.
It does. You now have to ask, is this in the client's best interest?
What is the practical difference between suitable and best interest? They sound similar.
Suitable used to have a lower bar. It could mean it's not terrible, like fitting a square peg into a square hole, even if the hole's a little loose and there's a better fitting round hole nearby. Best interest means you have to consider other options and choose the one that puts the client in the best possible position. You can't just pick the suitable fund that pays you the most if there's a cheaper, identical, also suitable option available. That other one is in their best interest.
When do we have to assess this? Is it just at the beginning when the account is opened?
No, absolutely not. It is a continuous, ongoing obligation. You assess suitability at the time of any trade, obviously, but you also have to reassess when new cash is deposited or transferred into the account, or when there is a change in the representative who is handling the account.
And crucially, when there is a material change in the client's life.
Exactly. This is key. If a client tells you they lost their job, their risk capacity just plummeted, you might need to rebalance their portfolio to be more conservative. If they tell you they just inherited $1 million, their capacity just shot up. You have to officially update the KYC form and reassess if the current portfolio is still appropriate. It's a living document.
The sources list some common unsuitable practices to avoid.
Mismatched time horizons is a classic. Selling a product with a 7-year lock-in period, like a fund with a deferred sales charge, to a client who you know needs the money in 3 years. That is automatically unsuitable because you are trapping their money and setting them up for a penalty.
Overconcentration.
Yes, putting all their eggs in one basket. Even if the client loves the tech sector, putting 100% of their retirement savings into one technology stock or fund is unsuitable. It violates the fundamental principle of diversification.
And the last big one is leverage.
Borrowing to invest. This can magnify gains, but it also magnifies losses. It is extremely risky. Recommending leverage to a client who has a low risk tolerance or an unstable income is a major compliance failure. If the market drops, they still owe the loan. It can wipe people out completely.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here. I mean, from the alphabet soup of regulators all the way to the deep ethics of a best interest standard.
It is a lot, but I hope listeners can see that single thread running through it all. It's all designed to formalize trust. The regulations exist because historically, just trusting people wasn't enough. We need these rules to ensure that everyone is playing fair.
As we wrap up, what is the one big takeaway you want people to leave this deep dive with?
For the aspiring advisors out there, it's one word: documentation. My old boss used to say, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. You can have the best, most thorough conversation in the world with a client, but if you didn't write down the notes, their risk tolerance, and the reason for your recommendation, you are completely defenseless if a complaint ever comes in. Your notes are your shield.
And for the investor listening,
Understand that when an advisor asks you these detailed questions about your income, your debts, your goals, they aren't just being nosy. This isn't just bureaucracy. This is the mechanism that protects you. The more open and honest you are with your advisor, the better that protection works.
I want to leave us with a final provocative thought. We talked about this big shift to the client's best interest standard. It sounds great on paper, but it fundamentally changes the entire industry, from a sales business to a true profession.
It absolutely does. It forces advisors to stop asking, what product can I sell today? And start asking, what solution does this person actually need? It is a harder job for sure, but it is a much more valuable and honorable one.
And maybe, just maybe, all that red tape we talked about for the last hour isn't there to trip you up. It's the safety harness that lets us all climb higher without falling.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Canadian Investment Funds course. We will catch you on the next one.